That's right. You read it correctly. What the worms are getting today is stolen. Stolen. Is that how stolen is spelled? Well, stolen must mean something different in German, I guess. Because this is some sort of a imported, sort of a cake product, I guess, or whatever. It's a roll with, here's like a side cut of it. It's like a roll with apple, like a strudel, I guess, and it's marzipan, and it's got some raisins in there, and it's got a good bit of weight to it. It's over a pound, 1.1 pounds. Since I got 2 bins to feed today, I'm going to throw a half a pound into one bin and the other half into the other bin. And I've also, on top of that, got coffee. What goes better with some pastry than a little bit of coffee, right? So these worms are going to have a field day. The worms getting this tasty little treat today are the worms that we celebrated their 200th day in service last time we checked in. And that was 10 days ago, so the bins are now 210 days of age. And I usually do my worm bin feedings earlier in the day. At this point, it's getting pretty late in the evening, and I haven't even eaten dinner yet, so I figured, you know what, why don't I take care of getting the worm bins fed, and then I could proceed up to take care of getting myself fed. So I've got my motivation in place to try to get this job done a little bit more quickly than usual. I have a tendency to ramble on. So these pieces of top covering newspaper, they're pretty far gone. There's no way I could reuse those as top covering anymore. This feeding zone indicator is in great shape though. But even though it's in great shape, we're going to use that as supplemental bedding as well, because we've got 2 new coffee filters, so we can replace the feeding zone indicator here. These are African night crawlers, or at least that's what I was told that they were when I got their cocoons from the crazy worm lady years and years ago. And right from the beginning, I didn't take very good care in making sure that they were isolated and kept separate from other types of worms. So for all I know, I could have something completely different in here. I could have a total mishmash of different types of worms in here. Just a little cocoon right there caught my eye as I was sort of brushing the stuff aside. I believe I see another one right there. Thought I saw another one as well, which is kind of nice. The material in here feels quite damp, and I don't know if that's really a problem. It should be all right. Just definitely feels more damp than it needs to be. We're going to be putting in a little bit of dry bedding today. The dry bedding that I thought we'd be putting in would be what you see right here. Just my box of dry leaves from outside. Totally replenished supply. And I guess we can see some of that already in here at the bottom of the previous feeding. It was probably a combination of that as well as some of my prepared bedding. Today they're just going to get the leaves. So let's see, we've got some banana peel here. Worms are working on it. There's another chunk of it right here. I didn't really take a lot of time to prepare for today's feeding other than checking to see what the age was and how many times the system's been fed up until now. So this is feeding number 20 that they're getting today. It's kind of funny, during the last time we came down here to feed them 10 days ago, I accidentally picked up the wrong 2 containers, and those are the bins that I originally, or at least those are the bins that got the food that I bought down here originally intended for these guys. And then I had to come down here with another batch of food, since these were the worms that I really wanted to check in on their 200th day in service. I'm seeing more banana peels. I'm just wondering if banana peel might have been part of what they got last time. It could very well be, because these banana peels are in pretty good shape, not very heavily broken down. A lot of the bedding is still holding up pretty good too from the last time. And I'm kind of glad that the things that we're putting in here aren't going to bring with them too much moisture. The coffee, one of the days worth of coffee has just been sitting out since yesterday. The other one I took out of the machine, just before coming down here to feed. But that stuff too was brewed early this morning, and whatever moisture went through that coffee was hours ago. That strudel or whatever that stuff is, that that pastry that we're going to be giving them. I don't think is going to bring with it very much moisture. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, and the bedding. Yeah, the bedding is going in dry as opposed to when I use my prepared shredded paper cardboard mix. That stuff's usually put away and stored damp. So that usually goes into the bin with its own little bit of moisture, but I think it'll probably be beneficial to be putting a feeding in here that's not bringing with it any additional moisture, because it doesn't seem to be like any additional moisture is going to be necessary in here. So let's try to get some of these worms that I stuck up against the walls off the walls and back down into the bed. See one on my glove too. It doesn't matter. I'm not reaching into my supply of prepared bedding. That's when I usually want to make sure I don't have any worms stuck to my glove. Here we're just pouring out of the box, and maybe just a little bit more, and that should do. So I'm even curious to see what this stuff looks like. Let's go ahead and just slide it out of its packaging. I guess this stuff sort of went past its expiration date, and it was starting to get a little bit of a funky smell. Sometimes I don't worry so much about expiration dates, but in the case of this stuff, it did appear to have a little bit of a kind of a, I don't know, it's hard to describe the smell. I'm not even sure if it's fair to call it a moldy smell, but I guess just not exactly what it should have been, I think. So this stuff to me seems for the most part like it's like a pastry. There's apple in here, there's raisins in here. Marzipan is what we call it in Hungarian. I'm not sure what the pronunciation in English is. I figured I'd try to break it up and spread it throughout the feeding area. And it does have a nice appley smell to it. It probably would have been a tasty treat, but it did seem to be far enough past its expiration that it seemed sensible to not eat it. So my loss is the gain of the wormies. I just put in a little bit of pulverized eggshell as grit, and then we're going to drop in a day's worth of coffee. And you know, I forgot about the stuff that we had intended to recycle as supplementary bedding. And we've also got these old food bits that we collected along the way too. So let's bring in these things that we thought might be useful as supplementary bedding. The old feeding zone indicator, the shreds of newspaper that had served as top covering previously. There's stuff like a corn cob over here, making nice progress. And we've packed this feeding zone quite up to the rim, it seems. And you know what? Before we spread the coffee out, I'm gonna sprinkle a little bit of my worm chow in there too. And one of my viewers is always curious to try different things, and I like the suggestion that she made in one of her comments yesterday, which was to, you know, do what I usually do in one of my bins when I'm doing a pair like this, which is to sort of blend the worm chow down in with the feeding, and then maybe for the second bin, if I don't forget between now and then in the next few minutes, to apply the worm chow on the top surface. So I think we're going to try that. So thank you for that suggestion. It does seem like an interesting thing to try to see if we can spot a difference between the two bins when we come back in here the next time to feed. So as we cover up the feeding area, we could use a lot of this excavated material that came out of the feeding zone. This is the stem of a banana, various leftovers over here. And I think, whatever, just for the heck of it, we usually do a quick till up of the outer edges of my bins just to see how things look out there, and if for no other reason, just to give them the benefit of a little bit of aeration too. but it seemed like the middle was also starting to rise a little bit high relative to the outer edges of the bin, so I thought that maybe by aerating things on the outer edges we can get things a little bit closer to level too. So here, this is what I don't like, is when the stuff starts to get so damp that it gets muddy like that. So hopefully by adding a whole bunch of dry leaves and a relatively dry feeding, maybe the next time we come back in here we won't see stuff clumping together quite as much, and maybe it won't appear quite as muddy as it does now. Because it would be kind of nice to see things dry off in here a little bit. But I do like the idea of keeping the plastic coverings on the way I normally do, just because it creates a nice humidity zone beneath itself, and it makes the entire surface of the worm bin right beneath the plastic fair game for worms to explore right out on the surface and everywhere. So I kind of see that as being one of the main benefits of running plastic coverings. Now I would like to do a quick top covering here, so I'm just going to reach over and grab some of this junk mail that I bought downstairs a moment ago, and let's see if we can create two pieces of top covering like we found when we first got in here, so that we can restore things more or less the way we found it. And now we can move on to feeding the second bin. Very nice. Let's see if we could let's see if we could avoid forgetting, or try to remember to put the worm chow on at the end instead of down within the feeding zone. Okay, on to bin number 2. So now, since these bins have the same start date, they're the same age, they've been getting managed concurrently with one another over their entire lifespan, I now feel like I kind of know what to expect coming in here for the most part. So a lot of times I'll treat the exploration of the first of multiple bins like this as my sort of my test drive of what I'm doing. But by the time I get to the second bin, which should be almost identical to the first bin, I feel like we can move along a little bit more rapidly. So here too, I think we're going to kind of follow suit with what we did before, is just to excavate and stir up the contents of the feeding zone, possibly checking out some of the leftover foods from the last feeding. That was a piece of corn cob that I just set aside, and a good bit of leftover leaves. Usually when I'm already bumping into leftover bedding material from the previous feeding that still seems like it's still relatively dry, I do like to try to blend it in with the surrounding materials as long as I'm handling it. So not only am I going to excavate here, but I'm also going to attempt to stir some of this now seasoned bedding material in with some of the surrounding stuff, and once we get into the reset of the feeding area, we'll be giving them a nice fresh batch of bedding to throw in here. So I think we're seeing a lot of the same stuff. We're seeing some so like this right here is a chunk of pumpkin stem, and I think the pumpkin stem that was in here was kind of fragmented into multiple pieces. It accidentally got busted up into little bits somewhere along the way. The one that we pulled out of the feeding zone in the other bin was still intact in one solid piece. Here's some banana peel, a little bit more of this somewhat dry bedding material. Here's another chunk of that pumpkin stem. So for whatever reason, I like to try to keep those pieces of pumpkin stem together so I can still see them almost as a whole object, and just from a perspective of their mass, keep tabs on how their deterioration over time is coming along. And I'll admit I wasn't very thorough examining all this stuff that we excavated, so I might have lost track of one or two things. This is yet another piece of pumpkin stem, so I think these three pieces were actually all together, so if we were to take care to try to reassemble them like a puzzle, they would probably fit together quite nicely. It's kind of astonishing that we're able to find them and reunite them that way. So this looks good. I like being able to take all this old bedding and now sort of stir it in with the surrounding stuff This way, the next time we see this stuff, it's definitely not going to be as dry as it is now. It'll be nice and damp by being in contact with the surrounding damp materials. Piece of lime. I was able to smell it already as I was nearing it. Nice citrusy odor. And we might not encounter any more leftover bits. Here's another leftover piece of corn cob. But other than that, I think we've encountered pretty much all the leftovers that we're going to see in here today. And I believe we've created a nice enough opening that we can start right into the replenishment of their food supply. So let's do the same as we did earlier. What's this? More chunks of stuff. Possibly corn cob, but I'm not certain. So once again, we're going to pile in a little bit of leafy material here. Here too, it seems like stuff's a little bit damp, and by putting in this stuff in dry, I bet you it'll help a lot. And then in can go the last feedings leftovers, and some of this is actually leftovers from feedings that predate the last feeding, like that pumpkin stem there, that goes way back. But there's those three pieces that we like to try to keep together. All these very little bits of corn cob all over the place. I believe that's what all these are, corn cob. That's a corn cob. And then there was more banana peel here and there. And oh yeah, all this nice bedding. I don't know, didn't we have a feeding zone indicator too? What happened with that? Or wasn't there one? I don't remember. Well, it doesn't matter because they're getting a nice new one. But I think we've now collected up all the stuff that we've set aside from the top surface, as well as all the stuff we excavated from the feeding zone. So let's pile in the tasty little treat that we got for them. This crazy German pastry. Okay, maybe I shouldn't use my clean hand, right? Try to keep it clean, because this stuff is a little bit sticky and it's got powdered sugar on it. So I hope the worms like it. Sometimes when I come back into my bins and I put something that's similar to this, like a, kind of like a doughy, I mean, I don't know, it's pastry, so it's dough basically. To me, it's almost like a form of bread in a way. Perhaps with just a ton of sugar added to it. So, I don't know, that might be the deciding factor. That might be just what it takes to get the worms to go and just go hog wild on this stuff and gobble it all up. Or maybe the next time we come back in here, the stuff will be covered in mold and hardly touched by the worms. So, I'll be curious to see how it's received by the wormies. And no worm chow to accompany the coffee. The coffee will go in, and then we'll save the worm chow to get sprinkled across the top surface. And that'll be the slight little deviation between the setup of these two systems, so that maybe next time we could see if there's a noticeable difference in terms of how the worms react to having the worm chow sprinkled out across the top. And that was going to be my application method for putting the worm chow on at the end, which is just to spread it out across the top. So here, I don't know if the material in here is quite as damp as I found it to be in the other system. In the other system, I would pull out a handful of stuff, and a lot of it would seem like it was just like a very clumped together, muddy pile of stuff. Here, it seems like the material's a little bit more flowing, which is nice. I like it that way. So that's cool. Good to see. So let's keep trying to level things off here. I guess once we aerate this outer edge too, we'll have a little bit more extra material we could use to spread out across the top surface and level things off. I guess sometimes like this I wonder if I'm going to have spoken too soon and find a bunch of muddy stuff over here, but no, things look very nice out here too. They're all crumbling, these castings, in my hands as I, brush up against them. None of it seems like it's holding together the way it did in the other system. So it almost makes me feel like when I go back to put this system back up on the shelf over there, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to also at the same time go over there and sort of loosen up the top coverings on the other bin, just to allow for that system to get a little bit of air to dry off at least the top surface, And then maybe next time when we're in here to feed, we can blend in that somewhat more dried material off the top surface down into the material at large, and then maybe we'll have ourselves 2 bins that have a fairly consistent moisture content to them. So before we place on any top coverings here, I think I'm going to go with a somewhat smaller pair of top coverings in addition to the feeding zone indicator, because I've got a feeling they're going to just gobble this stuff up. I don't know why, but I think if they come up and go for this worm chow sprinkled out across the top surface, they're going to be out there anyway, and they're going to see that newspaper and they're going to chew on it. So I'll be curious to see how that newspaper holds out between now and the next feeding, now that we've placed the worm chow out on the top surface, to, you know, see what kind of results we get. So kind of similar. The only differences are somewhat smaller top coverings and worm chow on the surface here rather than blended into the bin. But otherwise, that's it. We're done here. So once again, I feel like I got to remind myself, because I just have this kind of tendency to forget things. Let's not forget any worms on my glove either. So yeah, I just figured maybe when I get back over to the to that other bin, we won't leave it as nice and thoroughly covered the way this one is. Maybe I'll cinch it in around the edges and allow the outer edges to get a little bit of airflow, and maybe we'll have a somewhat drier bin in the other one, and then it'll be very much more similar to what we see in here. All right, everyone, that's it for today's feeding of our now 210-day African nightcrawler bins, feeding number 20, and the bins look great. I gotta say, I really like the way things are coming along in here. So that's it for me today. It's off to dinner. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm getting hungry. But before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.